Hello, hello. I'm Erin Ade. This is Boom Bust, and these are some of the stories that we're tracking for you today. First up, labor disputes at California's shipping ports drag on Tuesday, and the delays are now having a ripple effect throughout the U.S. economy. So when will a deal finally be reached? We're going to look into that coming right up. Then Paul Craig Roberts is on the show. The former Treasury Secretary is sitting down with me to talk about Ukraine, Greece, and oil. And in today's big deal, Redacted Tonight host Lee Camp is joining me live on set to discuss the revolving door that is Washington to Wall Street. You definitely don't want to miss a moment, and it all starts right now. West Coast seaports in the U.S. were all but shut down over the holiday weekend because of contract disputes. Tuesday, U.S. Labor Secretary Tom Perez arrived in San Francisco hoping to broker an agreement between shipping companies and the union representatives for over 20,000 dock workers on the West Coast. The federal negotiator was called in after a partial shutdown of 29 West Coast ports stretched into a third day on Monday. President Obama was under pressure to weigh in on the labor disputes, which have had a ripple effect throughout the U.S. commercial supply chain. The Pacific Maritime Association said that talks between the International Longshore and Warehouse Union have dragged on since May 2014 and hit a snag over a union demand for changes in the system of binding arbitration of contract disputes. However, the union has insisted that the two sides are near an accord. Let's hope so, because the deadlock has had far-reaching implications. The 29 effective ports handle nearly half of all U.S. maritime trade and more than 70% of imports from Asia. The negotiation deadlock has had a domino effect across much of the U.S. economy, like I said before, prompting disruptions to everything from transportation to manufacturing, agriculture, and even retail. Now, inbound cargo vessels continued to stack up outside of the nation's two busiest cargo hubs, that would be Los Angeles and Long Beach, California. And starting Saturday, companies locked out workers who would load and unload ships, saying that they would not pay weekend or holiday wage premiums to crews that they accused of intentionally slowing down work in order to gain bargaining leverage. The union, however, denies slowing down and says its members want to work. The union has blamed changes in shipping practices initiated by the carriers themselves for causing worsening backlog and says that suspending vessel operations may only worsen the matter. Now, the West Coast ports are a critical trade link with Asia and the gateway not just for imports like electronics and household goods and all those other retail yummies, but also for U.S. exports like meat and produce. The last time contract talks led to a full shutdown of the West Coast ports was in 2002, when the companies imposed a lockout that was lifted 10 days later under a court order by President Bush. The shipping industry has estimated that the lockout back in 2002 caused $15.6 billion in economic losses. So the big question is, what would be the cost of a full-fledged port shutdown in today's economic environment? Well, the retail and manufacturing industries have projected that a full extended shutdown of the ports could cost the U.S. economy some $2 billion a day. Let's hope Perez is as good a negotiator as they say he is. To get his take on Greece and the U.S. stock market, Paul Craig Roberts is on the show. Now, Paul is the chairman of the Institute for Political Economy. Let's try that again. He's the chairman for the Institute of Political Economy and served as the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury in the Reagan administration. Let's start off, okay, Paul, by talking about Greece. Now, has the Eurozone's approach to the Greek economic and debt crisis failed? What are your thoughts?
Yes, it has. And either the EU's approach will have to change, or we may see Greece exit the system. You know, I was intrigued by the report that the Russian government had offered financing to Greece. So if I was the Greek finance minister, prime minister, I'd be tempted just to default on the debt and line up with Russia. Because you would then be, if you defaulted, you would be debt-free. You'd have a perfect credit rating, and therefore you could borrow from the Russians, and that would begin, I think, the unwinding of the EU, because Italy would follow, Spain would follow. So Russia has a chance to unwind the EU.
You know, that's interesting that you bring that up, and I'm glad that you do. I want to ask you, how realistic is that scenario? And if it does happen, is Russia really in a position to be handing out money to countries defaulting on their debt right now?
Oh, sure, sure. And if they aren't, their strategic partner, China, is. And the BRIC Bank, you know, they've set up this BRIC Bank, allegedly has $100 billion. So I do think if the BRICS wanted to reduce the pressure on them from the United States and the American puppet states in Europe, they could do that. It would be a brilliant stroke to acquire Greece, because I think, as I said, Italy and Spain would follow. And of course, the EU is under other pressure because of the very hostile American moves against Russia. This now worries Germany and France. They see they're being pushed into a confrontation that doesn't benefit them, that they don't want. So you really have the EU under two pressures. One, the refusal to make any reasonable deal with the indebted countries. And second, they are pressed by Washington into hostile actions against Russia that's against their interest. So the whole system is under tremendous pressure right now.
Paul, the Greek finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times on Monday in which he wrote, quote, "Our government is not asking our partners for a way out of repaying our debts. We are asking for a few months of financial stability that will allow us to embark upon the task of reforms that the broad Greek population can own and support, so we can bring back growth and end our inability to pay our dues." Now, that sounds well and good, but the economic group formerly known as the Troika is saying to Greece, either follow the existing program or suffer dire consequences. So it doesn't look good, does it? What do you think is going to happen realistically?
Well, I think if the EU is sensible, it will back off and write off some of the debt. You know, what we have learned from the Greek case, we've actually known since from the 1930s, from John Maynard Keynes, that when you impose austerity on a country, you drive the economy down and it's less able to deal with its debt. And that's what's happened to Greece. The austerity program has driven the economy down such that the burden of the debt is now a much greater one than it was prior to the austerity. And so the Greek finance minister is recognizing that and says the only way we can possibly service these debts is to have a growing economy. And yet the program you've put on us is driving the economy down, and therefore the debt burden becomes larger year by year, and we can't deal with it. It's driving the people into the ground. And so something has to be done. So I'm convinced that the Greek government, this new Greek government, will have to stand its ground. Now, of course, we don't know what kind of threats it's receiving from Germany and from Washington. I mean, these threats could be horrific. But on the whole, it looks like a determined government. It got a mandate and it has to stand by it. And so it will be up to the Germans whether or not they force this to a conclusion that Greece leaves the euro and the EU. That would be a terrible mistake if you want to hold the EU together, because if Greece leaves and they are picked up by Russia or the BRICS, then you can see Italy and Spain starting to make the same kinds of negotiations. So this controversy and the failure of the EU to realize what's really at stake, it's not just the creditors of Greece, it's the EU itself. This could end up splitting up the European Union.
Paul, if you were negotiating for the Greek government right now, what would you do?
Well, I'm much more radical than they are. I would call up Putin and say, is that loan offer real? And if he said yes, then I would call up the creditors and say, we default, we're not paying a cent.
There you go. You'd see if that offer was still on the table. And then go.
Reopen the central bank and start issuing Greek currency.
There you go, and toast to it in Santorini or something. Now, Paul, while stocks in the U.S. have done reasonably well, oil and commodity prices have plummeted, and so have the yields on the safest global government bonds. So what's the connection here between capital allocation debt and stock market volatility?
Look, the real funny thing is that the world is sinking into depression, and that explains the collapse in commodity prices. The demand is gone, and yet the stock market in New York is very high. So clearly the stock market either hasn't a clue about the real economy or it's rigged. It has to be one or the other. You can't have the worldwide collapse of commodity prices, which is always a sign that demand has collapsed, which is a sign of serious recession, depression, and yet the stock market right now is over 18,000, the Dow Jones in New York. So either the market is not a predictor of anything, that it hasn't a clue, or the stock market is totally rigged. There's no other alternative explanation.
That was the always controversial Paul Craig Roberts, and one of our very favorites. He's also chairman of the Institute for Political Economy. Time now for a very quick break, but stick around because when we return, Warren Mosler will be on the show. The chairman of Consular Engineering sat down with my colleague Edward Harrison to talk about Greece. And in today's big deal, I'll be joined by Redacted Tonight host, the wonderful Mr. Lee Camp. Now, Lee and I are chatting about the fun practice of Wall Street paying its bankers not to work on pivot tables and leverage buyouts, but to work in the government. It's a true story. It's kind of amazing. You don't want to miss it. And remember, if you do miss it, you can see all segments featured in today's show on YouTube at youtube.com/boombustrT and on Hulu at hulu.com/boom-bust. Now, as we go to break, here are a look at some of your closing numbers of the bell. Don't go anywhere. I'm a fighter. I can take a punch. I live. I learn something every day. I strike when I need to strike. Just like that. I prepare. I've earned everything I have. If I fall, I get back up. I won't be underestimated. I'm Erin Aid, and I put the boom into boom bust.
Here's what people have been saying about Redacted tonight.
Give it to us.
Redacted is full-on awesome.
So
the only show I go out of my way to watch every week. It really packs a punch. Lee Camp is the John Oliver of RT America.
You guys do have the same accent.
Hey, we are apparently better than boobs.
Nothing's better than boobs.
You see, people you've never heard of love Redacted tonight. The president of the World Bank, though, hates it.
Why do you guys really have any taste?
Seriously, you send us an email.
So you visit the doctor for a routine checkup, and he tells you that you need immediate surgery. But I've been healthy my whole life, you say. No, he says, you must be feeling pain. And you say, but I don't feel any pain. Let's get you prepped, but scalpel, please. And you don't say a thing. You just take it. It's the same with news. You can just sit back and take that first opinion, or you can get a second opinion.
Welcome back to the show. Up now is our interview with Warren Mosler, president of Valence Incorporated and chairman of Consular Engineering. Now, Edward first asked Warren for his take on what Greece's true options are now, considering most European countries are taking a hard line against their proposal for debt relief. Take a look at what he had to say.
Well, given the other alternative, which we didn't discuss, which is, you have to stay in the union, then your only option is to do whatever they dictate. And I think the others realize that the leverage is not there and that whatever the Troika dictates, they have to do. And if they break ranks here, they're just going to be subject to the same thing. The population of Greece wants to stay with Euro. They want to stay in the European Union. I think it was 70% or something like that at this point. Okay, and so for the others to break ranks and side with Greece is almost unthinkable politically. Not that I wouldn't do it if I were them, but for the particular individuals involved, I think it's almost unthinkable. Now, if I were negotiating for Greece and I had to stay in the Union, then what would I do, right? Now my job is to convince the Troika and the others that A, their policies don't work, which isn't too hard to do, they can see the statistics, but then explain why they're not working and what they can do to make the entire European Union work in hope that they move in that direction. And a lot of those things would involve Greece getting, quote, the concessions that it's asking for, are really things that should be done across the Union. And the first thing is that 3% deficit limit has to go. It has to be raised from 3% to maybe 8%, and maybe they would raise it a little bit every year, maybe 1% a year for 4 or 5 years until the unemployment rate got down to where they wanted it to. And the justification behind that, and this is how I would argue, I'm not saying I'd win the argument, but I give it a good go, is that what's happened to the European Union is that they are punishing the good savers. Okay, the reason Greece had a high deficit, even Belgium, Italy, the others, is because the government deficit equals the savings in the private sector, and there's a very high propensity for the economy to be a net saver. They just like to save and not spend.
Now, see, the
right?
problem I have with that argument, though, Warren, is that, you know, obviously you have the external account that comes into play, and we know that the Germans, post-2005, ran up an enormous current account surplus, and the Greeks and also the rest of the periphery had a current account deficit. So really, you know, in terms of what was driving the government balance, you could make the argument that it was actually the Germans and their new programs under Hartz IV and so forth that was actually causing this, and that it wasn't the actual savings of the periphery.
Yeah, but that's a different point. The point here is that if the deficit limit was expanded from 3% to 8%, then the periphery would have enough net savings to have their unemployment rates drop dramatically. Mm-hmm. And Germany, for whatever reason, doesn't need it. And the others need it because of their savings desire, okay? And don't forget, Germany was a pretty large exporter to the rest of Europe. Isn't that, I forget the percentage, maybe 70% or something like that. And before European Union, of course, that was accomplished by Germany buying their currencies. Okay, so that was kind of a symbiotic relationship. You know, I remember the kind of reluctantly, maybe kicking and screaming, but Germany's buying all these lira. Well, at the end of the day, this was supporting their exporters and supporting the export-driven economy, right? And so, but what I would, again, I'm not saying I would absolutely win this argument, but I think I would, because the argument is there, and you can look at the foreign balances, and they're not large enough, okay, to account for all the differences. There's, you know, Germany could still do marginally better than Italy or Spain, but they wouldn't have, Italy wouldn't be at 13% unemployment and Greece wouldn't be at 25. Maybe Italy would be at 6 and Germany would be at 3. Okay, the differentials would be at levels that you could talk about in civilized company, not these obscene levels of unemployment and destruction of civilization that, you know, it's not wrong to call it a crime against humanity. Look what they've done across Europe. And not that it's part of the equation, but if you look at German consumption, it hasn't done well. So what's happened is the bar's been lowered so much that, you know, Germany's doing relatively better than everyone else, but on an absolute basis, it's not doing well. And certainly, you know, the unemployment just got down into the 6s. You know, that's not, unemployment is supposed to be at 3%, right? Not 6, 5.5, 6, 7.
Now, you know, from what I understand, other periphery countries like Portugal, Ireland, and Spain, they've taken a hard line regarding Greece. My question is why, and how different is Greece from the rest of the periphery?
It's been self-preservation, right? Now, what's happened is when Mario Draghi said, we'll do what it takes to prevent default, suddenly the financial crisis was over, the rates crisis was over, interest rates started coming down, everyone could fund themselves again. And they all became beholden on the central bank to be able to fund themselves. And their memories aren't that short. I mean, it was only a couple of years ago, right? 2.5 years ago. So they they know that they're in the mercy of the European Central Bank, which became the only central bank in the world to actually dictate both monetary and fiscal policy, because they're holding this funding sword over the heads of the other members, and it was getting awfully close to France, and Germany's not too far away, and so they at the time, and then they and so these other countries know that if they step out of line, they lose their funding protection. They're faced with the same thing Greece is, which is high interest rates and the inability to fund themselves in a collapsing economy. It's even worse than it is now. And it was said about Greece, you think things are bad, yes, but they could get a lot worse. And that was one of the government statements. If we don't stay in the European Union, they could get a lot worse. Well, and they compared themselves to like Bulgaria or something, where it's worse.
Right. Are you hopeful for Europe, Warren, or are you concerned about the economic and political situation, that it actually is going to get worse?
Yeah, I'm concerned that it is going to get worse, that Greece is not going to be the leader that will then cause positive change to happen. They're not taking that position. And I don't see any let-up in the austerity, apart from, they're going to continue to apply it, but maybe not as hard and not as fast or something like that. Bring your deficit down more slowly, bring your debt to GDP ratio down more slowly. There's no talk of relaxation of any of these things. There's no talk of that it's a failed policy and it's time to go the other way. I just don't see that anywhere. And I don't see it anywhere in the world. I don't even see it here in the United States. I see President Obama, who should be on the other side of that, based on where he supposedly is politically, still talking about what we have to do to bring down the deficit. And I see the progressives talking about we have to tax the rich to be able to bring the deficit down, right? And so the whole thing continues to go the wrong way, as it's been going for far too long now.
That was Warren Mosler, president of Valence and chairman of Constellier Engineering. Time now for today's Big Deal. It's Big Deal time, and joining me today is the positively wonderful Lee Camp, host of Redacted Tonight, resident funny man here at RT, and all-around great guy. And today we are talking about the intersection of big banks and Wall Street, specifically Wall Street's fun practice of paying its bankers multi-million-dollar salaries not to do broker hostile takeovers or negotiate mezz financing, but to fulfill their civic duties by getting jobs in D.C., basically hanging out in DuPont. Now, I'll let Lee Camp explain this with a clip from his show, Redacted Tonight.
It's come out recently that Wall Street Goliaths like Citibank, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley are trying to keep hidden their practice of paying executives multi-million-dollar awards for entering government service. Millions to enter top government positions so that they can have inside men like termites eating away at regulation and slowly destroying anything that might allow more economic equality rather than putting all the nation's wealth in the hands of a tiny number of people.
Like termites. Now, I have to say, I absolutely agree with this. I actually tweeted this out. This is mind-boggling to me, and it seems that Wall Street is basically getting their employees into government, big government, federal government. But I want to know, how exactly is this happening? What are they doing? How are they able to do this and secure these jobs?
Well, they just get huge amounts of money to join what, Citigroup would like to call public service, right? And they actually quote the New York Times as saying, an opinion in the New York Times that said it's to encourage public service. Yeah, but that's like saying, you pay a pedophile to be a Boy Scouts troop leader, and then you're like, what? It's community service. We paid him for community service. Look, this is a huge conflict of interest. People should be furious about this. Well, Antonio Weiss, who's the counselor to the Treasury Secretary, Jack Lew, got $21 million from Lazard to go be in public service. But of course, he's going to do things that are favorable for Wall Street.
And wasn't Jack Lew, he was on Wall Street before.
Yeah, Citigroup.
Citigroup. And we all know this revolving door. But what's amazing to me is Lazard is paying, Lew's underling $21 million. How much did he make at Lazard? You make it all in millions with your bonus, but that seems like an obscene amount of money to me. And obviously their buddies are going to give them, I'm sure, obviously Lazard and Citibank work close together all the time. It's just fascinating to me how
Right.
much money they're giving to not work at your company, to work as a, kind of mole, or they'll call it liaison, or there's
a Manchurian government agent.
Manchurian government agent, literally,
It's like filling the government. I think term might have been too nice of a term, but filling the government with, people that are going to be favorable to Wall Street, ensure policy that's favorable to Wall Street. And these aren't nuns that are being paid this amount of money to join government. These are people who, whether some people argue it's good or it's bad, have spent their lives finding profit, getting money. So then when they're paid a lot of money to be in government, what are they going to do? They're going to help their sugar daddies, and then they usually go running back to the arms of their sugar daddies after government.
I mean, that's what you do with a sugar daddy. Yeah. that's how that
Right.
works. But, should we continue to expect this from Wall Street, Washington? Is there anything being done about it? Does anyone care to stop this?
It doesn't seem. I mean, everyone should be furious about this, but it doesn't seem to be slowing down. I mean, they weakened Dodd-Frank recently, so it's not. It's just it seems to be getting worse, and it's another factor of the revolving door between Wall Street and government. It's like for the when the Wile E. Coyote would strap the rockets on the roller skates to get the Roadrunner.
Right.
This policy is the rockets to the revolving door around, and these people have to take Dramamine to deal with the motion sickness of the revolving door.
It's so true, and we all knew that this was in existence. We all know the revolving door is there, but the fact that they're still on payroll from their previous employer, then working in D.C., where are your allegiances going to lie when you're getting, a government salary at best? Like, what does the president make? 150,000, 200,000?
I think it's like 400.
Okay, but at best, and that, which is, top of the barrel, versus 21 million, where you're going to go home
where
to.
Your allegiance
is there any other industry that does this? Does pharmaceutical do this? Does agriculture? Everyone has lobbyists, but they aren't specifically in government.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very common to have the revolving door between big pharma or big agro or whatever, which is another thing we should be horrified about. But I don't know. I mean, if someone can correct me, I don't know that other places will pay someone to leave to go join government.
Yeah.
But if that's happening with other places, then it's the same problem.
You know what? That's great. And if any of our viewers know, and we'll find out for you. But no, it's so interesting.
And trying to keep it hidden.
And trying to keep it hidden. Yeah, that's the thing where you're like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Like, this is silly. Lee, it's awesome chatting with you. You have to come on more often.
Thanks.
All the success in the world with your show, which you're already having. If you haven't seen it, you got to tune in. Friday nights, Redacted Night. It's absolutely awesome. That's all for now. But we love hearing from you here on Boom Bust, so please check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/BoomBustRT, and please tweet at us at Aaronade, at EdwardNH, at Lee Camp.
At Lee Camp.
At Lee Camp. From all of us here at Boom Bust, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.